Hello and welcome back. Today we are starting part 4 of The Complete Idiot's Guide to Alchemy by Dennis William Hauck. If you wouldn't mind, please check out the first 3 videos. Those are part 1, 2, and 3 so that you have a really good grasp of what we're talking about. Alright, let's get started. Part 4, Practical Alchemy. The primary goal of medieval alchemists was the creation of the philosopher's stone that would instantly perfect or cure anything. Their work involved spending many hours in the laboratory, heating materials at high temperatures for long periods of time, and carefully distilling essences from fermented solutions. The laboratory work of the alchemists gave rise to modern chemistry and also created a new healing modality known as spagyrics. In spagyric alchemy, plant material is opened up by heating, cutting, and grinding, and the essences that are released are preserved in oils, tinctures, and elixirs. Unlike chemistry, however, the methods of alchemy always involve the simultaneous purification and transformation of the alchemist himself, whose conscious pattern and symbiotic connection to the substance was considered a necessary ingredient. Chapter 14. Inside an alchemist's laboratory. In this chapter, step inside a medieval laboratory, the heart of the laboratory, the athanor, chemicals and tools used by alchemists, sacred space of the oratorium, differences between chemists and alchemists, the role of women in alchemy. The popular image of the crazed and disheveled old alchemist working late at night away from prying eyes in his cluttered laboratory is not really very accurate. For one thing, alchemical laboratories during the Middle Ages and Renaissance were actually very organized. As we can see from alchemists' workplaces that have survived, there was a place for everything and everything had its place. Equipment and chemicals were kept on shelves or bins where they could easily be accessed, and the vast variety of glassware alchemists used were usually sorted by size and conveniently hung on the walls. As for alchemists themselves, they were mostly serious experimenters, not eccentric crackpots. They were usually highly educated, intelligent people with a keen interest in discovering the secrets of nature. During most of the history of alchemy in Europe, it was necessary to know Latin and Greek to even begin learning the subject, and alchemists were known for their dedication to scholarly pursuits. They studied alchemy manuscripts religiously, kept careful records of their own work, and traveled extensively to compare their findings with other alchemists. Alchemists were among the leading philosophers and scientists of their times. Even many government rulers and religious authorities were alchemists. In Europe, scores of monks, bishops, and even a few popes practiced alchemy. Nearly every physician in the late Middle Ages used alchemical remedies and was familiar with the theories of alchemy. At one time, Hermetic philosophy and alchemy were taught at universities in Europe, and nearly every major university had a practicing alchemist hidden among its faculty members. Historical researcher Mircea Eliade described the traits needed by an alchemist. He must be healthy, humble, patient, chaste. His mind must be free and in harmony with his work. He must be intelligent and scholarly. He must work, meditate, and pray. A tour of medieval laboratory. Perhaps the best way to get to know the alchemists and how they worked is to take an imaginary tour of where they spent so much of their time. Our alchemy laboratory is a composite of several actual labs used by alchemists, and I have incorporated features that were customary in several different time periods and countries. From the alchemist. A lot of the alchemist's laboratory work was done outdoors, especially in the warmer climates of Asia and the Arab lands. Alchemical experiments often produced thick smoke and fumes, which were more readily dissipated outdoors. Also, the heavy brick furnaces used by alchemists were easier to build and maintain outside. Let's begin our virtual tour of an idealized alchemical laboratory by politely knocking on the thick wooden door of the lab. While a few alchemists were willing to talk about their theories, almost none allowed outsiders actual access to their laboratories, so this is a rare opportunity. Why did alchemists not encourage visitors? The need for secrecy in their work was the most important reason, though safety was also a factor. Often several experiments were in progress that took weeks to complete. Plus, potent chemicals and fragile glassware were usually involved. Beyond that, many alchemists believed that other people's impure thoughts and emotions could actually ruin their delicate experiments, so they were very careful about whom they let in. But the door to this lab opens, and we are invited into the alchemist's sanctuary. He respectfully greets us with a bow of his head and then cautions us about a few experiments he has going on. Before he even finishes his sentence, however, we are distracted by a powerful odor carried by a draft of air going out the door. It smells like a combination of rotten eggs and strong vinegar. The alchemist explains the repugnant odor is coming from the large digesting tub full of rotting material in the corner behind the door. He uses this digester in the operations of putrefaction and fermentation. The Athanor. We glance over into the foul, black, gurgling liquid in the digesting tub and wonder if this might be a good time for a quick exit. But before we can turn towards the door, we notice a tall, cylindrical brick furnace at the center of the room. Gentle warmth emanates from the furnace, and we move closer. Called the Athanor, this brick or clay oven is where most of the alchemist's transformations take place. The word comes from the Arabic word atanar, meaning oven. It is also called the philosophical furnace, the furnace of arcana, or the furnace of secrets. In popular parlance, it is known simply as the tower furnace because it usually stands over 5 feet tall. The alchemists nicknamed the Athanor Piger Henricus, or Slow Henry, because of its steady, slow-burning fire. Designed to maintain a constant, even heat over long periods of time, it had several different compartments suitable for the different stages of the work. Its primary function was to incubate an egg-shaped hermetic vessel used for the preparation of the elixir. Philosophically, the Athanor was like a womb of fertilized egg, and many experiments required the alchemists to keep it burning for 40 weeks, which was considered sufficient maturation time for the human fetus. On the spiritual level, the Athanor was a metaphor of the inner fire in the alchemist's mind and body, and corresponding changes were expected to occur in the alchemist himself as the transformations took place in the Athanor. Just as the Athanor was the heart of the laboratory with everything built around it, so was the alchemist's life centered around his sacred furnace. Alchemical glassware. On the wall to the right of the Athanor hangs a bewildering array of glass vessels on wooden pegs. The opening of each vessel is inserted over an appropriate-sized peg, and the vessel is hung there to dry or for safe storage. It is easy to discern which ones are seldom used because they are covered in dust. Many alchemists were skilled glass blowers and potters, and the glass or earthenware vessels they designed each had a specific function. Alchemists used these vessels to carry out the operations of alchemy, and making or finding strong and durable vessels was an important part of their work. From the alchemist. Alchemists viewed their vessels as containers of spiritual energies, and each had esoteric as well as practical uses. Although an instrument, the alchemical vessel nevertheless has peculiar connections with the first matter and philosopher's stone, noted Carl Jung. So it is no mere piece of apparatus. For the alchemists, the vessel is something truly marvelous and miraculous. It is more a mystical idea, a true symbol like all the central ideas of alchemy. The most popular vessel among alchemists was the retort, a glass sphere with a long neck or spout. It could be tightly sealed with a stopper, and the long spout was handy for pouring or connecting to another vessel. The retort was a versatile vessel that could be used to mix, separate, decompose, heat, or distill solutions. A vessel of distillation had 3 parts, one of which was the alembic, which was a kind of retort that fit on the upper part of a still to collect and direct the distilled vapors into a condenser. The lower part of the still containing the boiling liquid was called the cucurbit. Alchemists sometimes called it the gourd because of its shape. The final part of this apparatus was the receiver, which was the flask attached to the outlet of the condenser that collected the distilled product or distillate. Other vessels used by alchemists include the matras, which was a round-bottomed flask with a very long neck that was also known as a bolt head. The aludel was a pear-shaped glass open at both ends. Used in the process of sublimation, it was also called the hermetic vase. Other glassware included a wide assortment of different-sized beakers, cylinders, bottles, flasks, and jars. Crucibles and cupels were used in melting and other high-temperature operations. Crucibles are small clay or porcelain cups made to withstand high temperatures in the oven. When the alchemists made these, they added graphite to increase the heat resistance of native clays. Cupels are porous pots made of bone, ash, and clay. They were used primarily in a process known as cupellation, a form of fire assaying in which noble metals were separated from base metals. Lead and other impurities were absorbed into the bone ash of the cupel or released as fumes, leaving behind pure silver or gold. Each operation of alchemy had its own special vessel designed to contain the transforming matter as well as preserve the energies at that stage. Many of these were patterned after nature and named for animals. One of the most popular was a circulatory distillation vessel called the pelican. This impressive glass vessel had two-sided arms that fed condensed vapors back into the body and resembled a pelican pecking at its breast. It was a common belief in the Middle Ages that pelicans wounded themselves in order to feed their hatchlings with their own blood. Other names the alchemists gave their vessels reflected the spiritual and psychological process associated with them. Among these intriguing names were philosopher's egg, skull cap, brain pan, angel tube, spirit holder, moon vessel, mother of the stone container, matrix vase, Hermes cup, cup of Babylon, and tomb of the dead. The chemicals used by alchemists. On the opposite wall of the laboratory are several shelves full of alchemical treasures. The lower shelf holds assorted vials, crocks, and burlap bags containing the salt, powders, and colored liquids, and other compounds used by the alchemists. Each container is carefully marked with a unique alchemical cipher that signifies its contents. Alchemists had hundreds of compounds, powerful acids, metals, and other chemicals at their disposal. The colorful names alchemists gave to their compounds were full of hidden meaning. For example, sal ammoniac, or ammonium chloride, was so named because it was first made with camel dung from the temple of Ammon in Egypt. Ammonia was also known as spirit of hartshorn because it was distilled from an ancient substitute for yeast and baking soda known as hartshorn, or ammonia bicarbonate. Another name for ammonia was salt of urine because, you guessed it, it was distilled from urine. Many of the compounds used by alchemists in the Middle Ages dated back to ancient Egypt, and among the ones the Egyptians discovered were 4 important chemicals that became known as the arcana to later alchemists. Arcana is Latin for great secrets, and medieval alchemists held these chemicals in the highest esteem. They called them vitriol, natron, liquor hepatis, and pulvis solaris. Vitriol. The earliest alchemists secured both sulfuric acid and iron from an oily substance that appeared naturally from the weathering of sulfur-bearing gravel. This substance was known as green vitriol and, in its nature, was a powerful disinfectant. When heated, it broke down into a mixture of iron sulfate and sulfuric acid. The Egyptians used iron sulfate to heal wounds and prepared a therapeutic tonic from it. A relaxing powder known as the narcotic salt of vitriol was also made from it. Iron sulfate had many other uses in alchemy and was known as the green lion in the Middle Ages. Tread carefully. Do not attempt to handle or work with chemicals unless you have been properly trained in laboratory procedures. Labs are dangerous places for people who don't know what they are doing. Many compounds used by alchemists are toxic, especially metals such as antimony, lead, and mercury. The sulfuric acid distilled from green vitriol is brown and stinks like rotten eggs. It is extremely powerful and corrosive acid that reacts with most metals but not gold. Further distillation produces a heavy, nearly odorless yellow liquid known as oil of vitriol, which has a tremendous thirst for water. If a flask of oil of vitriol is allowed to stand open for some time, it absorbs water vapor from the air and overflows its container. Alchemists considered sulfuric acid to be liquid fire and the agent of change in most alchemical experiments. It remains an indispensable agent in many modern industries. Natron. The word natron is from the Arabian name for the white salts that accumulate on dry lake beds. Philosophically, natron symbolized the common principle in all salts to form bodies out of solutions. Chemically, the word refers to either of two sodium compounds. The first of these is natron carbonicum, or sodium carbonate, which appears on dried lake beds or is mined out of the earth. The world's oldest known deposits are in Egypt. It can also be prepared by pouring sulfuric acid over common table salt. The second natron was natron nitricum, or sodium nitrate. It occurs naturally as cubic saltpeter and needs only to be filtered to be used medicinally. It can also be obtained by pouring nitric acid over common table salt. The alchemist who made nitric acid by pouring sulfuric acid over common saltpeter, or potassium nitrate, called it aqua fortis, or strong water, and used it to dissolve silver out of gold. Liquor hepatis. Ancient alchemists prepared liquor hepatis, or liquid of the soul, by distilling a solution of sulfur, lime, and sal ammoniac. They considered it a permanent solution because they had no methods of breaking it down once it was prepared. Because of its deep reddish-brown color, liquor hepatis was associated with the liver, and the name comes from the Greek word hepar, meaning liver. The alchemists also referred to it as oil of sulfur. The Egyptians were fascinated by the pungent odor of liquor hepatis. They believed it originated from a presence hidden in sulfur that was purified by lime and brought to life by ammonia. The Egyptians equated this hidden presence with soul, which they believed resided in the liver. Soul was the ultimate universal essence, and like liquor hepatis, could not be broken down into parts. Not only did liquor hepatis contain soul, but it suggested the idea of the soul's possible resurrection. The Egyptians made a balm of liquor hepatis by mixing it with wax and fat. This sacred balm, said to incorporate the powers of rejuvenation and healing, became known as the balsam of the soul, or the balsam of the alchemists. Pulvis solaris. If liquor hepatis represented soul to the ancients, then pulvis solaris, or powder of the sun, represented spirit. Pulvis solaris was actually a mixture of two compounds known as red pulvis solaris and black pulvis solaris. These red and black powders were created separately by combining highly purified sulfur with either red mercuric oxide or black antimony. Red mercuric oxide was made by heating mercury in a long-necked flask. The mercury oxidized into a white powder and red crystals. This white powder was a deadly poison, but the red crystals had healing properties. When the red crystals were mixed with pure sulfur, they combined immediately to form the red powder of the sun. Black antimony is a naturally occurring mineral known as stibnite, which is a sulfide of antimony. The mineral was melted and ground fine. It also had healing properties and was made into a tonic by mixing the fine powder in distilled water. When the black powder was mixed with pure sulfur, they combined immediately to form the black powder of the sun. Mixing the red and black powders together created pulvis solaris, which the alchemists believe had tremendous healing power on all levels of body, mind, and spirit. The way the original two powders immediately clumped together with sulfur to form new compounds demonstrated the natural longing or love of these ingredients for one another. By combining the two red and black powders of the sun together, the alchemists felt they had created a mystical third incarnation in which the sum was greater than its parts. The esoteric chemistry here also underscores a fundamental principle. Namely, soul is an indivisible, eternal thing, while spirit is a kind of energy that originates from the tension of two polarized forces. Thoth's tips. There are still alchemists' workshops you can visit. An alchemist's lab from the 16th century was recently discovered hidden in a chapel in Oberstockstall Castle in Austria. Now a museum, it is located 55 kilometers from Vienna in Kirchberg am Wagram. The Technical Museum in Vienna features a reconstruction of a medieval lab. The Alchemy Museum in Kutna Hora, Czech Republic, has a complete alchemist's workshop and another medieval lab is in Mihulka Tower in Prague. In Germany, there are alchemist labs in the castle in Heidelberg, the Museum of Science and Technology in Munich, and Wickersham Castle in Baden-Württemberg. Other exhibits can be found in the Pharmacy Historical Museum in Basel, Switzerland, and the Golden Eagle Museum in Budapest, Hungary. Hidden energies in the lab. As we continue our tour of the laboratory, we move our attention from the chemical supply shelf to a middle shelf that contains haphazard piles of tools and utensils which the alchemist uses. We notice assorted tongs, scoops, pincers, stirrers, spoons, ladles, and other items. Most of these are made of brass or copper, although a few are cast iron. Stainless steel was unknown in Europe in the Middle Ages. We also see a set of balance scales and a small herb pressed on this shelf. Small and large leather bellows are stacked at the end of the shelf. But the items on the upper shelf make our jaws drop. The dried carcasses of assorted frogs, birds, rats, rabbits, and other less identifiable creatures adorn this shelf, and a few preservative-filled jars appear to contain large insects. The alchemists were fascinated by all aspects of nature and often had large collections of preserved animals, especially rare or unusual creatures. Alchemists believed the life force was like a substance that they could separate from living things and preserve in special tinctures. They could then use these living alchemical solutions to impart health to sick people or even give life to inanimate objects. Many famous alchemists claim to have created little artificial beings, homunculi, by infusing the life force into flasks of chemical compounds. The life force was the quintessence the alchemists sought in plants and fermented organic matter, and one of the pieces of equipment they used in this endeavor stands next to a cluttered workbench at the back of our laboratory. Known as a serpent condenser, the giant air-cooled apparatus was used for distilling the foul-smelling solution poured off from the digester. Towering over the height of a man, it is composed of a shaky array of copper tubing that zigzagged upward from a thick, pear-shaped clay vessel on the floor. Using the serpent condenser, the alchemists hoped to purify and isolate the living essences of substances. The gentle, low-temperature distillation performed by the serpent condenser was thought to safely remove and preserve the purified essences from even the foulest liquid. The oratorium. Next to the serpent condenser, a large, dark curtain hangs suspended from the ceiling. It is carefully draped completely around a small altar on the floor. This tabernacle forms a private meditation space known as the oratorium, and as much work is done within this sacred space as is carried out in the laboratory. One of the mottos of alchemy is ora et labora, pray and work. Alchemists spent many hours in solitary contemplation, attempting to purify and focus their minds so they could connect with the divine powers. The following illustration, which is an engraving of an alchemical laboratory called the Amphitheater of Eternal Wisdom, shows the typical oratorium. The German spiritual alchemist Heinrich Kunrath designed it in 1609. In it we see the work of the alchemists divided into the oratorium on the left, where the spiritual work was done, and the laboratorium on the right, where he performed the practical work. The doorway at the center of the engraving is the completion of the work, when the alchemist leaves the laboratory behind and enters a whole new level of being in the world. Hidden somewhere in the oratorium could usually be found the alchemist's incubator. This insulated, copper-clad wooden box was the most sacred spot in the lab. The sealed container, kept warm by the fermenting matter within, was where the alchemist directed his thoughts and visualizations. During the process of fermentation, the first matter was most exposed and most open to the influence of the alchemist. However, it was a delicate operation. At the beginning of fermentation, the resurrected life was easily corrupted by another's impure thoughts, which is why the alchemist always kept the incubator hidden, even from other alchemists. He believed that if anyone other than himself touched or even looked upon this box, all would be lost. This attitude may seem superstitious to us, but we should not judge the alchemists too quickly. They were acting completely in accord with the ancient principles of Hermetic philosophy. To alchemists, consciousness was a force of nature that could be purified and directed through prayer and meditation. This esoteric part of the experiment was absolutely necessary for its success. As we come to the end of our tour, we thank the alchemist for allowing us to visit his private workshop and sharing his work with us. We have learned much about the fundamental tools of alchemy. As we pass by the digester on the way out of the lab, the odors are not nearly so repugnant as when we first encountered them. To our surprise, it now seems like the fragrance of magic is in the air. Alchemists and chemists. The alchemical principle that the consciousness of the experimenter influenced the outcome of the experiment just may explain why alchemical experiments cannot be duplicated in a chemical laboratory. It is not that the experiments never worked, but just that the chemists do not know how to perform them. Chemists who fully believe their experiments take place only on the mundane physical level see no need to purify themselves or meditate prior to beginning work in the lab. Their mindset is that chemistry operates by rearranging atoms like so many billiard balls, a methodology much too crude for the alchemist. From the alchemist's viewpoint, chemistry is a superficial and artificial science that deals only with the external forms in which substances manifest, while ignoring the essences of energy and light that created them. In our tour of an alchemist's lab, we have seen the fundamental tools of medieval laboratories that made alchemy such a unique blend of science and spirit. Still, from our modern viewpoint, it's hard to imagine how much a part of their experiments were the alchemists themselves. All matter was alive to them, and they sympathized with the subject of their work every time they exposed it to fire, submerged it in acid, or bathed it in cooling waters. The uncanny identification with the processes in the laboratory was absolutely necessary, because the alchemist and his work fed on each other. The alchemist suffered with his work, felt its same temperament, and changed with it. For if the experiment was truly a success, the alchemist too was transformed. The key to this whole magical process was the conscious connection or correspondence the alchemist was able to forge between his own mind and the mind of nature as expressed in the experiment. Women in alchemy. The role of women in alchemy was often in the shadows. During the witch hunt of the Middle Ages, it was extremely dangerous to be a female alchemist, and generally the woman's work was out of the limelight. However, nearly every alchemist had his moon sister who worked by his side in experiments and meditations. Flamel's work could not have been accomplished without the aid of his wife Purnell. Rebecca Vaughan, wife of the 17th century English alchemist Thomas Vaughan, is another example. Female alchemists from Alexandria, such as Maria Prophetessa, Cleopatra, Hypatia, and Theosebia, laid the foundations of much experimental work. Other famous female alchemists include French physicist Marie Curie, German author Leonia Constantia, and the Englishwoman Anne Conway and Thomasine Scarlett. The least you need to know. The Athanor was the tall brick furnace alchemists used in their transformations. The shape of alchemical glassware had both practical and spiritual purposes. The arcana of alchemy are powerful chemicals that date back to ancient Egypt. Most alchemical labs were divided into an oratorium, where spiritual work was done, and the laboratorium, where the practical work was done. Most true alchemists were intimately connected to their work and expected corresponding transformations in their own minds, bodies, and souls. Although early female alchemists did their work largely out of the limelight, nearly every male alchemist had a moon sister who worked by his side. Chapter 15, The Spagyric Process. In this chapter, the hidden signatures in everything, the kinds of medical cures, the inner star or true identity of a substance, the 3 essentials in spagyrics, the time of planetary magic, the genius of Paracelsus. Spagyrics, pronounced spa-gyr-rix, is the applied alchemy of isolating the essence of plants and herbs. The Swiss alchemist Paracelsus invented the word by combining the Greek words spau, tear apart, and agiro, gather together. So the term spagyrics literally means to tear apart and bring back together again. In spagyrics, the plant is dried, ground up, or pressed to concentrate its essences, which are then separated and brought back together in a more purified and potent form. The object of spagyrics is to isolate the living essences of the plant and preserve them for later use, while at the same time getting rid of the useless or impure parts. Spagyria, said Paracelsus, teaches you to separate the false from the true. Alchemists use the spagyric process to make all true alchemical tinctures and elixirs, and they must meet very specific conditions to say that a compound is spagyric. In general, spagyric compounds take much longer to make than normal chemical compounds, because spagyric preparations must be made during certain alignments of the planets that are determined by the signatures of the plant itself. The doctrine of signatures. The doctrine of signatures originated in ancient Egypt with the idea that divine correspondences can be found in the manifested world. This concept was inspired by the Emerald Tablets dictum of as above, so below. According to the ancient text, Archidoxy's signatures are hidden archetypal patterns in things that have the power of transmuting, altering, and restoring us. Alexandrian alchemists started categorizing plants by their signatures. They defined signatures as the characteristics plants and other objects shared with the planetary powers and astrological events in the heavens. In Eastern philosophy, Chinese alchemist Lao Tzu was the first to clearly elucidate the doctrine of signatures. He stressed the fundamental relationship and corresponding signatures between heavenly powers and earthly manifestation, an idea that pervades modern Taoist thought. He also stressed working only with the true signature of a thing, what he called a substance's inner virtue. In the West, the alchemist Paracelsus expanded the doctrine of signatures into every aspect of human life. He taught that man should carefully consider the inner essence of a plant for what it tells us from its properties, structure, color, odor, and habitat. These signatures reveal the resonating correlations between plants and human beings. Paracelsus created a whole new system of planetary and astrological correspondences between plants and human organs that allowed physicians to prescribe herbal remedies according to the symptoms of their patients. Types of medicines. The art of spagyrics is very different from modern pharmacology, primarily because modern druggists ignore the spiritual or esoteric properties of plants and herbs. In the view of spagyrists, modern physicians rely entirely on the gross or chemical properties of drugs to treat disease and forget they are really dealing with the life force of a person. Allopathic medicine. Contemporary medicine relies on the allopathic approach, which means it uses medicine designed to evoke the opposite symptoms from the disease it treats. One example would be the use of the powerful laboratory chemical phenolphthalein to treat constipation. The chemical provides very fast relief by leaching water from the intestines, and was the ingredient in the most popular laxatives for over 50 years. Unfortunately, it was later found to be carcinogenic and toxic with continued use, and was quietly withdrawn from the market. This physically aggressive, overkill approach to fighting disease focuses more on acute symptoms and less on preventative care. The guiding principle in allopathy is that the more powerful the medicine and faster the cure, the better. As a result, physicians are caught in a never-ending spiral of developing new drugs as the life force adapts to the gross effects of the previous wonder drug. Homeopathic medicine. While allopathic medicine uses compounds that elicit symptoms directly opposite to those produced by the disease, homeopathic medicine uses minuscule doses of a compound to treat a disease in which large doses of the same compound would produce similar symptoms. This is done in the hopes of eliciting a healing response from the body. The German physician Samuel Hahnemann, whose motto was "like cures like," developed the homeopathic approach in the early 19th century. For example, the homeopathic preparation Nux vomica is given for constipation. This nut from the strychnine tree contains a powerful poison that causes dehydration, constipation, and binding of the bowels. In extremely small doses, however, it relieves constipation. Spagyric medicine. In spagyrics, the key is to learn to increase or redirect the life force itself by using living essences with the relevant signatures or properties to cure the disease. Spagyrics is careful not to use allopathic chemicals, which are considered gross or dead remedies. Spagyrics is also different from homeopathy, though both symptoms make use of the essences of plants and treat disease as disturbances of the life force. The primary difference is that plant essences are not diluted but concentrated in spagyric preparations. So in practice, spagyric medicine is a middle approach between the extremes of allopathy and homeopathy. For example, to relieve constipation, a spagyricist might prescribe a few drops a day of a tincture of Oregon grape, Mahonia aquifolium. Oregon grape is ruled by Mars and stimulates the liver and gallbladder to increase acid production in the stomach to cure chronic constipation. In other words, the tincture slowly induces the body to cure itself. Tread carefully. In general, spagyric compounds work on very subtle levels, and using them either allopathically or homeopathically can have unpredictable results. Unlike nearly every other type of medicine, true spagyrics are living essences that grow stronger with age and maintain a characteristic ability to adapt to changing conditions. More importantly, they are considered reactive spirits, that is, they possess a kind of primitive intelligence, and can be influenced by the conscious intent of both the patient and the therapist. There are also differences between spagyrics and general alchemy. Alchemy is a unique melding of philosophy, religion, and science, the goal of which is to gain knowledge of matter and perfect it on all levels. Spagyrics, on the other hand, is much more practical as it addresses the present human condition and the problems of everyday life with minimum philosophizing. The planetary signatures. The spagyric remedy works by healing people of systemic blockages or imbalances in their life force. The spagyricist seeks to produce a specific medicine based on its signatures that he can use to cause the body to cure particular ailments. Here are the signatures of the planets. The signatures of Saturn are associated with fate, structure, and the passage of time. Saturn rules the bones, teeth, spleen, and slow chronic processes such as aging. The therapeutic effects of Saturn are drying, coagulation, and mineralization of tissues. The signatures of Jupiter are associated with general well-being and overall health. Jupiter rules growth, the metabolic system, the liver, and the enrichment of the blood from food. Jupiter's therapeutic effects preserve the body and promote healthy growth and organ function. The signatures of Mars are associated with stimulation and action. Mars rules the blood, adrenal glands, genitals, and the immune system. Mars' therapeutic effects are toning the blood and stimulating the immune system. The signatures of Venus have to do with refinement of energy in the body and mind. Venus rules the face, skin, and kidneys. Its therapeutic properties are detoxification, improvement of sense organs, and reversing impotency and sexual dysfunction. The signatures of Mercury are associated with mental clarity and creative energy. Mercury rules the vocal organs, throat and lungs, and the lymph glands. Its therapeutic effects are physical and mental adaptability and improved regulation of bodily rhythms. The signatures of the moon are growth and fertility. The moon rules the stomach, the womb, and fluids of the body. The therapeutic effects are sedative, cooling, moisturizing, balancing, and breaking of bad habits and physical addictions. The signatures of the sun are general vitality and improved overall systemic function. The sun rules the heart and circulation, metabolism, and the distribution of bodily heat. Its therapeutic effects are balancing, heating, and energizing in a steady and controlled way. The stars in the planets. In spagyrics, the opposing operations of tearing apart and bringing together are the main processes of working with herbs, flowers, and other plants to make medicinal elixirs, tinctures, balsams, and powder. First, the plant is reduced to its most basic essences, which are further purified and recombined to make the new exalted compound. The inner essences or strengths carried the signatures of the plant, what Paracelsus called its inner star. By the doctrine of signatures, as above, so below, a plant's inner star or essence is closely related to the stars in the heavens. Heavenly bodies rule plants because a plant's inner microcosmic star corresponds to a universal macrocosmic star, and the star of a plant is what gives it its signatures. In general terms, then, the star is the truest part of anything, the divine thought or image that gives a thing its form and being. By opening up a plant and revealing its star, the spagyricist hopes to use its incorruptible power to affect other things in predictable ways. One must understand, elaborated Paracelsus, that the medicine must be prepared in the stars, and that the stars become the medicine. From The Alchemist. To make a spagyric compound, one must not only perform the mundane laboratory operations, but also have the proper mental attitude and be aware of unseen spiritual influences. The spagyric product is prepared in a sacred space that Paracelsus referred to as in the stars, and every effort is made to protect that space from profane or materialistic influences. The three essentials in plants. A spagyric medicine is made by deliberately opening up the plant and separating it into all three of its component essences of sulfur, mercury, and salt, the three essentials. The work of the spagyricist is to separate and recombine these three basic principles as often as necessary until they are in perfect proportion and harmony with each other. In plants, sulfur resides in the essential oils, the most concentrated essences of a plant's chemistry and properties, and the carrier of scent, the most soulful attribute of a plant. Essential oils burn slowly, like a fuel, and are the plant's sulfur or energetic essence. Sulfur carries the properties that differentiate one object's chemical reaction or behavior from another. In spagyrics, mercury is the spirit, mind, light, or animating life force of a plant. Mercury is found in the spirit or alcohol of a plant, its volatile juice derived by fermentation or added as part of the process of extraction. In lab work, mercury is the intermediary life force that animates salt and sulfur, acting from the middle to connect the two principles of body and soul. Salt is the form that locks the two other principles of sulfur or soul and mercury or spirit into a body, allowing the plant to exist and function in the physical world. In plants, the salt level resides in the mineral components and hard structural tissues, such as stalks, roots, and leaves, that fire reduces to ash. The spagyric operation, which begins with the destruction and breaking up of the plant, is not complete until all three basic parts of sulfur, mercury, and salt are reunited in a purer form that is actually closer to the true signature or inner star of the original plant. In order to accomplish this, the spagyric work, like the great work of alchemy, takes place simultaneously on all three levels, the physical, the mental, and the spiritual, and requires the purified consciousness of the alchemist to succeed. Planetary influences in spagyrics. Paracelsus taught that the star or astral energies of each visible planet affects plants on Earth in predictable ways. Each planet influences some plants more than others, depending on the inherent astrological and planetary signatures within the individual plant. He described this active connection between plant and planet with the term sympathy. Spagyrics advocates that sympathy governs most of the basic characteristics of the living things on our planet, and each of the 7 visible planets affect plants, animals, and humans in specific ways because of this underlying sympathy. For instance, as each planet rules an organ or organ system in the human body, and by extension its diseases, similarly each planet rules the plants that support the organ or are able to balance it with the corresponding planetary energies. According to this theory, all aspects of spagyric processing, including harvesting the plant, cutting and sifting it, drying it, wetting of the plant material with alcohol for extraction or distilling it, and adding its salts and other separately extracted materials should take place during the times ruled by its corresponding planet. Planetary hours. The planetary powers are greatest when the planet is visible in the sky, which is called the planetary hour. Traditionally, the planetary hours are determined by using charts originally developed by Trimethius, Paracelsus's teacher. 3 types of planetary charts are used to determine the proper time to work with a spagyric compound. The simplest planetary chart is the Mercury level chart, in which a single planet rules each day all day. A Mercury level preparation is directed towards disturbances and depletions of the life force, such as chronic fatigue or lethargy. To attune a spagyric to the mercury level, a highly refined alcohol is used for extraction, which is elevated before use in a process called animation. Animation of the mercury is a method of spiritizing the material worked on, making it volatile so it can open up and receive the universal life force, and then close again and hold that life force. Thoth's tips. You can download the charts of planetary hours from www.crucible.org/pdf_files/planetary_charts.pdf. To attune a spagyric preparation to the sulfur level, the essential oils are extracted separately using steam distillation and other alchemical methods. The sulfur level chart changes each hour, beginning at sunrise, and each planet rules several periods in a single day. A sulfur level preparation is directed towards physical or mental aberrations and deep-seated disturbances of the soul. To attune a spagyric medicine to the physical or salt level, a concentrated extract is made with all the mineral components extracted and included in the remedy. To accomplish this, all the plant matter that would have normally been discarded is burned to an ash. From that ash, the salt essences are extracted in alcohol. These operations must be performed at the time of day indicated in the salt level chart, which divides the day into 7 equal planetary periods. A salt level preparation is directed towards specific bodily injuries and ailments. Paracelsus the Great. Paracelsus was a vigorous and unyielding proponent of a new order in both alchemy and medicine. As such, he aroused vigorous opposition from the physicians of his time. Some evidence even indicates that a group of physicians from Vienna murdered him in his home in Salzburg. Paracelsus's provocative actions certainly did nothing to calm his detractors. For instance, in 1525, he publicly burned the works of the revered physicians Galen and Avicenna before the assembled citizens and physicians of Basel in Switzerland. Such actions were typical of this stubborn genius. He expounded his ideas with great vigor and seasoned his words with biting sarcasm. Paracelsus even upset the alchemists of his time with his frequent criticism that they should give up trying to make gold and instead should assist physicians by finding new cures. His determined efforts to liberate the incipient science of alchemy from the narrow and sordid domination by the multipliers and bellow blowers gave alchemy a new and nobler direction. Paracelsus's contributions to the development of alchemy in the late Middle Ages were immense. Besides developing the theory of the three essentials and applying it to all levels of the great work, he invented the art of spagyrics and gave the world a powerful new healing modality. His spagyric methods would gradually develop into what he called iatrochemistry, literally meaning healing chemistry, which gave birth to our modern practice of medicine. Today, Paracelsus is recognized as the father of modern medicine for his revolutionary practical advances in medicine. The least you need to know. Spagyrics is the art of breaking open a plant to release its fundamental living essence, and preserving that essence for purposes of healing. Signatures are the archetypal correspondences between the manifested object and its divine image or origin. Remedies fall into three general categories of allopathic, homeopathic, and spagyric. Planetary hours are the times of the day and week when the powers of a certain planet are at their peak. Paracelsus completely reorganized the theoretical and practical basis of alchemy and changed its emphasis from making gold to making cures. Chapter 16: The Kitchen Alchemist. In this chapter, setting up the kitchen laboratory, making alchemical compounds, creating custom tinctures at home, making the magical elixir. An old Sulfi saying goes, "All the qualities of a good alchemist can be found in the person who can cook an egg perfectly." In other words, fancy glassware and exotic chemicals do not make an alchemist. The true characteristics of a good alchemist are patience, attention to detail, striving for perfection, and knowledge of how to use fire in the work. So, cooking and alchemy actually have much in common. Instead of beakers, flasks, and formulae, the cook works with pots, pans, and recipes. Alchemists and cooks work with the four elements: fire, water, air, and earth, and both transform materials through the application of fire. The cook dissolves, emulsifies, chars, boils, aerates, separates, macerates, blends, combines, ferments, distills, coagulates, and works through the same operations as an alchemist. And like alchemists, good cooks add a part of themselves to their work. This hidden fifth element in food is its spiritual essence or level of vital wholesomeness, projected into food through the attitude and intent of the preparer. This is the real secret of gourmet cooks, and why your mother's cooking tastes so good. The alchemical cook imbues food with positive psychic energy, the true quintessence of a meal. In this chapter, we take alchemical cooking up a notch and demonstrate the very little difference between a medieval alchemist's laboratory and your kitchen at home. Now that you're familiar with the basic principles of alchemy, there's no reason why you can't begin using them right now in your own home or apartment. Remember, you don't need a big fancy laboratory to do alchemy. In fact, you probably have everything you need to make infusions, tinctures, elixirs, and essential oils right in your own kitchen. Setting up your kitchen lab. The first step in setting up any alchemical laboratory is to find a safe and uncontaminated space in which to work. This can be as simple as a table or countertop, as long as it's clean and uncluttered and you can work there uninterrupted. What sets an alchemical laboratory apart from other workplaces is that it is a sacred space, and pollution in such an environment comes from disrespectful behavior, negative attitudes, upset emotions, and mundane thoughts. Tread carefully. Don't use aluminum pots and pans or utensils when making alchemical products. Modern alchemists feel that aluminum metal acts as a kind of energy sponge that depletes spiritual energy. Several scientific studies have seemed to support the alchemist's suspicions and have linked aluminum to mental retardation and Alzheimer's disease. Most kitchens are well supplied with the necessary tools and vessels to do alchemy. Knives, spoons, ladles, brushes, tongs, basters, funnels, a set of measuring cups and spoons, thermometers, and other common utensils can all be used. However, a small scale and a mortar and pestle are required, and you may have to purchase these. Your pots and pans, baking sheets, mixing bowls, strainers, and colanders will all come in handy. You may want to keep your alchemical tools separate from your cooking utensils to avoid possible contamination. It is also advisable to have some wooden or plastic spoons and glass or plastic bowls available, because you cannot use metal containers or utensils of any kind in making tinctures. Common ingredients you use in alchemical work include baking powder, baking soda, yeast, salt, cooking oil, lard, vinegar, and herbs. Alcoholic spirits are required to make tinctures, and the higher the proof, the better. I recommend odorless vodka or pure ethyl alcohol, such as Everclear. Although it is expensive and difficult to make, absolute grape alcohol, 200 proof or 100% alcohol, is the best alcohol to use. Never use denatured alcohol such as methyl or isopropyl alcohol because it is poisonous and can cause blindness. Making alchemical compounds. Alchemical compounds are preparations in which the life force has been purified and preserved using the operations of alchemy. And by following the procedures, you can make safe and effective alchemical products right in your own kitchen. The first step in making an alchemical compound is to choose a plant with the desired signature or properties you desire. A free online version of the alchemical properties of herbs and foods is available at www.alchemylab.com/guide2.htm. It lists the planetary and elemental associations for hundreds of plants and foods. An online version of A Modern Herbal, first published in 1931, can be found at www.botanical.com/botanical/mgmh/comindx.html. It contains the medicinal and culinary properties and folklore of hundreds of herbs. A good reference book for this purpose is Paul Bayle's Compendium of Herbal Magic in 1998, which lists the planetary associations and magical properties of over 200 herbs. You can grow your own herbs. Get them fresh locally from supermarkets or natural food stores, or order them dried and packaged. After you have secured the plant material, discard any thick stems or discolored leaves. Then wash the material to remove any dirt, mold, or insects. Be sure to thoroughly rinse and dry it. If you use pre-packaged herbs, this step is usually not necessary. If your plant material is fresh, you must dry it. Do this by hanging whole bunches from strings with leaves down or suspending plant pieces in a mesh bag in direct sunlight. You may use a commercial food dehydrator if you keep the temperature below 105 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Celsius to avoid scorching. The drying time depends on the thickness of the stems and leaves and on the ambient temperature. To test if drying is complete, break a piece to see if it snaps easily without bending. Seal the dried material in clean plastic bags or gasketed screw jars, such as jelly jars or canning jars. Properly label the containers and store them in a cool, dark, dry place until you are ready to proceed. You can make many different kinds of preparations from the plant material. The simplest is an infusion, which is similar to making tea. The volatile components of the dried flowers and leaves are extracted by pouring boiling water over them. Decoctions are a step beyond infusions and are used for plant parts like berries or roots that are harder to extract. Decoctions are boiled longer to reduce the plant parts to a soft consistency, which allows the essences to seep out into the hot water. Infusions and decoctions can be taken hot or cold, added to other preparations, or made into syrups by adding sugar and other thickeners. Definition: essential oils are the volatile, oily components of plants, trees, and grasses. They are found in tiny sacs or glands located in the flowers, leaves, roots, bark, or resins of a plant. Ointments are made by simmering the plant material in wax or fat. The resulting decoction is a solid mixture or balm. You can make creams and lotions by simply mixing the essential oils of plants in water with an emulsifying agent such as beeswax or egg whites that help disperse the oil. You can extract essential oils from plants by using one of 4 methods: steam distillation, expression, solvent extraction, and enfleurage. In steam distillation, the extracted oil is mixed with the water that condenses by passing hot steam through the material. In the cold expression process, the fresh oil is extracted by squeezing, pressing, or compacting the plant material. In the solvent extraction method, the oil is dissolved in a volatile solvent that is mixed with the plant material. When the solvent is evaporated, it leaves the oils behind. Enfleurage is a longer process involving the dissolution of the oils in heated animal fat. Alcohol is then added and the oils are recovered by distillation. 2 recommended guides to making and blending essential oils at home are Aromatherapy, A Complete Guide to the Healing Art by Mindy Green and Kathy Cavill, and The Complete Book of Incense, Oils, and Brews by Scott Cunningham. A wide range of enfleurage and oil distilling equipment is available from www.crucible.org. Making tinctures. The most popular alchemical preparation is the tincture, which extracts the active essences of plants in potencies that far exceed those that infusion or decoction can achieve. True alchemical tinctures are always made using the spagyric process, although many commercially available tinctures do not follow rigorous spagyric procedures and are actually just infusions. Preparing tinctures is not really difficult, but remember that alchemical work in general is slow, careful, and deliberate. In fact, the phrase "haste makes waste" was originally a motto of medieval alchemists. Remember to allow time for your feelings and intuitions to catch up with the thoughts that are guiding your work. The alchemist is an important part of any alchemical experiment, and the purity of the intention and attention of the alchemist affects the quality and potency of the finished product. Before you can begin the tincturing operation, you must complete a process the alchemists called preparing the menstruum. The menstruum is a particular type of solvent, usually alcohol, that was thought to have the power to dissolve and coagulate at the same time. The idea comes from the medieval belief that the egg or fetus takes its life and form from the menses, which dissolves in the process. In the writings of alchemists, the menstruum was often referred to as the mercury of the philosopher or Sophic mercury. It's necessary to prepare the menstruum because alcohol and other solvents are usually prepared by high-temperature fractional distillation, and it was felt that high temperatures depleted a substance of its celestial fire or spirit. Remember that celestial fire is one of the 4 grades of fire and is carried by the element of air. To replace the celestial fire lost during the preparation of the alcohol, you must perform what the alchemists called animating the mercury. This simple meditation involves slowly pouring the alcohol into an open beaker or glass while warming it very, very gently. The heat of holding the glass cupped in one's hands is usually considered sufficient. Pouring the spiritually depleted alcohol into an open glass allows it to replenish itself by breathing in the celestial fire in the air. This is the same idea in gourmet wine tasting when wine from a bottle is poured into a wine glass and gently swirled. This allows the wine to breathe before being consumed. The following step-by-step procedure is for making spagyric tinctures. As an example, we will be using the herb lemon balm. Lemon balm is a refreshing, sweet-smelling herb associated with the heart, the sun, health, love, and nurturing. Its element is fire, and its ruling planet is Jupiter. A favorite of alchemists, Aventina and Paracelsus recommended it for heart problems and as a tranquilizer. Modern physicians have prescribed it for psychiatric problems, as an antiviral treatment for cold sores, and to ease symptoms of cold and flu. Before you begin, download the charts of planetary hours from www.crucible.org/pdf_files/planetary_charts.pdf. Then follow these steps. Number 1. Begin working with lemon balm during the planetary hour of its ruling planet Jupiter. By consulting the planetary charts, we find that this is immediately after sunrise on Thursdays. The planetary hours for Jupiter occur in the 8th, 15th, or 22nd hour after sunrise on Thursdays. During the planetary hour, start with meditation or by praying that the mysteries of lemon balm may be revealed to you and that a sacred place be created in your heart and laboratory. When you feel ready, take about an ounce or 52 grams of the dried herb in your hand and begin crushing it by hand. Then move on to using a mortar and pestle or coffee grinder. This is the maceration operation when you reduce the material to a powder. During this phase, focus on the idea that you are breaking up the herb to release its divine essence. Place the powdered herb in a clean jar, then slowly, with focused intent, pour about 4 ounces or 120 cc's of alcohol over the herb until it is saturated with fluid, but the jar is not over 2/3 full. Tightly seal the jar. If you use a metal lid, cover it completely in wrap before screwing it on. Wrap the sealed jar in cloth or foil to protect it from light. Place it in a warm location, such as near a radiator, furnace, or water heater. Be careful that the temperature does not exceed 105 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Celsius, or the tincture may lose life force. Because the liquid cannot escape, an inner circulation or distillation begins as the fluid inside evaporates, as it warms up and condenses again. This natural circulation is responsible for the tincturing process, and the color becomes darker with each passing day. In alchemical terms, the coloration is the extraction of the sulfur, or soul essence, from the salt, plant matter, by the mercury, spirit, or alcohol. Shake the jar vigorously once or twice a day and continue this process for 2 to 3 weeks until the color of the tincture is considerably darkened. Treat the jar as your unborn philosopher's child, and do not let anyone else handle it. At this point, you are in a symbiotic relationship with this plant. Both your own soul and the soul of the plant are working together to give birth to a living tincture. After the color of the liquid is sufficiently dark, let the jar cool completely before opening it. If you open the jar when it is warm, some of the volatile essences will escape. Pour the solution into a clean bottle and press out any remaining liquid from the mass of remaining plant matter. Using coffee filters and a funnel, filter the solution until it is no longer cloudy. Save the filtered dead plant material and remaining liquid for use in making the elixir in the next section. Store your tincture in a cool place out of direct sunlight. Shake the tincture well before using it. As a calmative and general health tonic, take 2 to 7 drops of the lemon balm tincture up to 3 times a day. The drops may be placed on the tongue or dissolved in tea, water, or other beverages. To treat cold sores, you can apply the tincture directly on your skin. You can add tinctures to bath water, mix them with essential oils, or add them to ointments and lotions. Many people rub tinctures into the skin, where they are rapidly absorbed. However, be aware that tinctures can dry and stain the skin. You can also use tinctures to add scent or to anoint magical tools or jewelry with the desired planetary signatures. Thoth's tips. Each tincture brings its natural signatures into your body. Remember that tinctures are considered living compounds that respond to your conscious direction and intent. Visualization and meditation on the planetary energies will help realize and disperse the healing energies of tinctures. Making elixirs. Alchemists considered an elixir a more potent form of extract than a tincture because the elixir carried the resurrected body of the plant. Making an elixir involves purifying what is left of the plant matter after the initial tincturing process and adding it back into the original tincture. The alchemists saw this as restoring the original body or salt of the plant in a more perfect or spiritized form. The remains of the plant material we saved from making the tincture in the previous section are a depleted mass of waste material the alchemists referred to as the phlegm and feces. They also called it the caput mortuum, literally the dead head. It is the completely dead body or expired salt of the plant. This seemingly worthless material eventually becomes the elixir, and we see how to accomplish this in the following step-by-step procedure. Number 1. Place the caput mortuum in a heat-proof bowl or steel pot and cover with a wire screen. Because you have removed the tincture, contact with metal is no longer a concern. Next, use a match or butane fire lighter to ignite the material. Because of the smoke generated, it is best to do this initial burn outside or under a kitchen exhaust fan. Let the dead plant matter burn itself down to ashes. Let the ashes cool, then take them from the initial combustion and grind them into a fine powder using a mortar and pestle. Place the powder into a heat-proof dish or crucible and heat in your oven at the highest possible temperature until it has turned grayish-white. From the alchemist. Alchemists discovered that if they heated the ashes for prolonged periods, sometimes over a week, at high temperatures above 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit or 600 degrees Celsius, the ashes turned snow-white and finally transformed into a deep red color. Thus the process of making the elixir mimicked the progression of the 3 phases of the work: black, white, and red. Gray-white ashes are sufficiently pure for most alchemical work. Number 3, remove the ashes and let them cool. Then grind them into a still finer powder. The finer the ash particles, the easier to get the whitest or purest ashes. Number 4, store the purified ashes in a clearly labeled container. This is the purified salt of the plant. Number 5, at the correct planetary hour for the plant, slowly pour the original tincture over the purified ashes in a new container. If the tincture is still living, you should hear a slight fizzing sound. Gently swirl the mixture and then tightly seal the container. Shake vigorously for at least a minute or 2. Number 6, put the container with the ashes and original tincture near a low heat source in a darkened area or place in an incubator. Shake 3 times daily. The purified ashes, the salt, will eventually absorb the living essences in the tincture. The alchemists called this the digestion phase. Number 7, after 3 or 4 weeks, pour off any remaining liquid, leaving the salt residue in the container. Seal the container again and let it stand unshaken in an incubator or in a warm spot out of direct light. Number 8, after 2 or 3 weeks, open the container and let the material completely dry up. Carefully scrape the regenerated salt out of the jar and then grind it to a fine powder. Store this powder in a clean, opaque, or dark glass jar. The elixir powder is now ready for use. The color of the powder attests to its potency. Gray powder is the weakest, white is moderately strong, and red powder is the strongest elixir possible. It can either be kept dry and used as a powder or mixed with ethyl alcohol in dark glass bottles to make a powerful tincture. Elixirs are generally used like tinctures with similar awareness and intent on the part of the user. However, while tinctures work physically through the body, elixirs work from above through spirit. Elixirs are extremely pure essences that carry the highest vibrational energy of the herb from which they are made. Therefore, elixirs are often taken after preparing the body and mind by cleansing and meditation. Like tinctures, 2 to 7 drops are taken up to 3 times a day. The drops may be placed directly on the tongue or rubbed into the skin over the body's energy centers or chakras. Elixirs may take more time for their effects to be noticed than tinctures. However, the effects last much longer and are believed to initiate physical changes in the body. Elixirs are also used to add spiritual energy to the environment or during rituals. Adding a few drops of an elixir in the corners of a room or in a circle are thought to purify and protect the area. Placing a few drops on a bell or gong before striking it is said to resonate the spiritual energy of an elixir throughout a room. To alchemists, the preparation and use of an elixir is a sacred process. The elixir, which literally means from the ashes, represents the phoenix-like regeneration of the plant into a new body. This dead body, or the salts of the plant, has been resurrected through the sacrifice of the life force of the tincture. If the connection is strong enough between the alchemist and the plant, then a corresponding change is possible that makes the elixir magically regenerative for the alchemist too. This connection between the alchemist and the elixir is the basis of stories of alchemists living for hundreds of years. The least you need to know. You don't need a big laboratory or special equipment to practice alchemy. Alchemical compounds are different from other preparations in that they carry the living essences of the plants from which they are made. Only tinctures made by using the spagyric method are genuine alchemical preparations. The sealed jar method is the easiest and most direct method of making alchemical tinctures. Make the elixir by purifying the dead waste materials of the tincturing process and recombining them with the finished tincture. The colors of the ashes used to make elixirs progress through the same black, white, red pattern as the overall stages of the work. Chapter 17, Working with the Planetary Metals. In this chapter, the correspondences between Saturn and lead, the correspondences between Jupiter and tin, the correspondences between Mars and iron, the correspondences between Venus and copper, the correspondences between Mercury and quicksilver, the correspondences between the moon and silver, and the correspondences between the sun and gold. Of all the signatures of the planetary powers expressed on Earth, the purest and most powerful are in the metals. Each of the 7 planets of alchemy has its corresponding metal. Saturn produces lead, Jupiter tin, Mars iron, Venus copper, Mercury quicksilver, the moon silver, and the sun gold. And in alchemy, each planet and its corresponding metal share the same cipher. Researchers have documented the uncanny relationship between planets and their metals many times. In the late 1920s, in a series of impressive experiments, Lily Kolisko of Germany's Biological Institute showed that changes in the relationships between planets are reflected in changes in the chemical behavior of metals on Earth. For example, during a Moon-Mars alignment, mixtures of iron and silver compounds tend to be more active. Most recently, researcher Rudolf Hauck demonstrated that the relative speed of a planet in the sky is directly proportional to how electrically conductive its corresponding metal is. For instance, Saturn has the slowest apparent speed across the heavens, and lead has the lowest conductivity of the metals. The moon has the fastest speed, and silver has the highest conductivity. Statistical studies of the fluctuations of the prices of the metals also show a connection between the planets and their metals. For instance, during conjunctions of the moon and a planet, the value of the corresponding metal falls, while during a conjunction of the sun and a planet, the value of the corresponding metal rises. Other planetary events have also been shown to have an effect on the value of their corresponding metals. In order to understand the mystery of the planet-metal relationship, let's look at each of the 7 metals of alchemy to discover their deepest signatures. Also, we'll review the correspondences between the planets and the metals and try to understand how the alchemists worked with the metals to transform them. Saturn's metal, lead. While the alchemists considered lead the lowest of the base metals, they treated it with a great deal of respect because lead was said to carry all the energy necessary for its complete transformation into gold. To the alchemists, the ancient metal was a powerful sleeping giant with a dark and secret nature. Lead is indeed an ancient metal, a stubborn metal known for its durability and resistance to change. Lead products dating from 7000 BCE are still intact, and lead water pipes installed by the Romans 15,000 years ago are still in use today. Lead is the heaviest metal and a boundary of heaviness for all matter. All the metals beyond lead of greater atomic weight disintegrate over time by radioactive decay and transform back into lead. Geologists measure the age of radioactive rocks by how much lead they contain. So radioactive decay is really a process of Saturn that introduces a new characteristic in the metals, that of time. No natural process is more unalterably exact than radioactive decay, and atomic clocks are based on this leaden process. In many ways, lead carries the signature of Saturn's father time. Lead ores lack the slightest water content, and lead does not react with water in any way. Lead also resists many acids, including the traditional liquid fire of the alchemist, sulfuric acid. In fact, lead bottles are still used to store highly corrosive acid. From the alchemist. Actually, comparatively little lead exists in the Earth's crust, but the thing about lead is that once you make the metal, it never goes away. More than half the lead in the world today has been around for centuries and is being recycled over and over. Lead and silver. Lead has a strange relationship with the noble metals. In the periodic table, lead is in the same group as gold, and when it occurs in nature, it always is found with gold and silver. In fact, the chemical symbol for lead, Pb, is from the Latin word plumbum, which refers to liquid silver. We derive our words plumbing and plumbob from the use of lead in those applications. The most common ore of lead is galena or lead sulfide, which also contains the noble metals of silver and gold. The amount of galena processed for lead produces enough silver as a byproduct to make galena the leading ore of silver as well. In the smelting of silver, lead plays an important role by forming a layer over the emerging molten silver and protecting it from combining with air and splattering out. The volatile molten lead covering is gradually burnt away until only the pure silver metal peeks out from the veil of lead, in the smelter's terminology, in a stabilized form. Thus, lead protects and even sacrifices itself for the nobler metal. Saturn signatures in lead. Fresh-cut lead looks just like silver, but the silvery luster quickly fades as if the metal were dying before our eyes. Lead metal is very soft and can be easily gouged with a fingernail. Lead, also a sluggish metal, is the slowest conductor of electricity and heat, the least lustrous, and the least resonant. Lead's Saturnic signature of lethargy is expressed not only in its being the heaviest metal, but also in its tendency to form inert and insoluble compounds. No other metal forms as many. Lead reacts with more chemicals than any other metal. However, instead of producing something new and useful, lead kills the combining substance by making it inert, insoluble, and unable to enter into further chemical reactions. Another of Saturn's signatures of lead is its ability to dampen or absorb energy. Unlike other metals, when lead is struck, the vibrations are immediately absorbed and any tone is smothered in dullness. Lead is an effective soundproofing medium, and thin lead sheets are used extensively in the walls of high-rise buildings to block the transmission of sound. Thick pads of lead are also used in the foundations to absorb the vibrations of street traffic and even minor earthquakes. Lead is truly a destroyer of light and is known for its ability to absorb all types of radiation. Lead sheets are widely used in roofing to block solar rays, and lead foil is used to form light-proof enclosures in laboratory work. Added to high-quality glassware, lead crystal, it absorbs light reflections and makes the glass clearer. Sheets of lead are impermeable to all forms of radiation, including high-energy X-rays and gamma rays. Lead is the perfect shield against radioactivity, which is why it's used to transport and store radioactive waste. Lead poisoning. Lead is poisonous to all forms of life. Young, growing plants are adversely affected by even the smallest trace amount of lead in the soil, as it accumulates in the roots of plants and slows down the breathing process. Lead poisoning in humans is known as Saturnism, and symptoms include lack of energy, depression, blindness, dizziness, severe headaches at the back of the head, brain damage, attention deficit disorder, antisocial behavior and anger, atrophy of muscular tissue, excessive growth of connective tissue resulting in rigidity, rapid aging, and early death. Lead accumulates over time in the bones of the human body where it can never be flushed out. Children are especially vulnerable to lead poisoning, and it is believed to be an important factor in stillborn fetuses. Children with more than just 0.3 parts per million of lead in their blood suffer a significant slowing of brain function. Lead in paint has caused mental retardation and premature aging in thousands of children. Many research studies link lead exposure to anger and violence, especially in adolescence. One recent study conducted by Colorado State University of all counties in the United States revealed that the murder rate in counties with the highest lead levels was 4 times higher than in counties with the lowest levels of lead. The hidden promise of lead. To the alchemists, however, lead was still the metal of redemption and transformation. They knew that fire ruled lead, for the metal had an extremely low melting point and was easily separated from its ore by roasting in an open flame. The metal itself melts in a candle flame. Lead is very sensitive to heat, expanding on heating and contracting on cooling more than any other heavy metal. From the Alchemist. Lead has an amazing property that few people know about. When made into a fine powder, lead erupts spontaneously into flames. Powdered lead metal must be kept in a vacuum to keep it from catching fire. Otherwise, it ignites all by itself and burns down to a bright yellow ash. The alchemists were right. Lead truly does carry the fire of its own transformation. The wonder of lead is that hidden deep inside the gray, dead metal is a tiny, eternal spark that is the seed of its own resurrection. In the eyes of alchemists, this made lead the most important metal despite its unattractive darkness. For dull lead and gleaming gold are really the same thing, only at different stages of growth or maturity. Jupiter's metal, tin. To the casual observer, tin seems like a more perfected form of lead. In fact, the Romans called tin plumbum album, or white lead. Like lead, tin resists weathering and does not oxidize. Tin utensils buried underground or lost at sea in sunken ships shine like new when unearthed after hundreds of years. Like lead, tin is endlessly recyclable. Tinkers were gypsy craftsmen who wandered from neighborhood to neighborhood in Europe, melting down old tin kettles and utensils and recasting them. Natural tin metal is known as stannum, the Latin word for tin, which also gives the metal its chemical symbol Sn. Natural tin is extremely rare and is found with gold and copper deposits. Most tin comes from its sparkling ore cassiterite, or tin oxide, which has been an important source of tin for thousands of years. In ancient times, the metal was considered semi-noble and was used for jewelry in Babylonia and Egypt. But unlike lead, tin has pleasing acoustic effects and is used in the making of bells. It has a highly crystalline structure, and due to the breaking of these crystals, a cry is heard when a tin bar is bent. For many years, large tin sheets were used in theaters to simulate the sounds of thunder, which is very appropriate because Jupiter is the god of thunder. Tin metal has only a few practical uses. The most tin is used in a variety of useful alloys. The development of bronze, an alloy of 5% tin and 95% copper, marked a new age of advancement known as the Bronze Age. Most solder is a combination of tin and lead. Pewter is also an alloy of tin and lead. Other tin alloys are used to make tin cans and tin roofs, and a thin layer of tin applied to other metals provides protection from corrosion. Jupiter's signatures in tin. Oddly, the distribution of tin on Earth follows an ecliptic angle to the equator that is the exact track of the orbit of Jupiter, slicing through the planet. Even stranger, these Jupiterian forces seem to form tin veins that follow a distinctive zigzag pattern through the rocks that resembles a lightning bolt. There is no haphazard, but an astonishing confirmation of Jupiter's energy expressed in the distribution of its metal on Earth. The German philosopher Goethe was fascinated by the distribution of tin and suspected it might explain how all the metals were arranged in the Earth through the distant effects of their corresponding planets. A remarkable influence proceeds from the metal tin, he wrote. This metal has a differentiating influence and opens the door to a mechanism through which a way is provided for different metals to be formed in primeval rocks. The Tin Plague. In the late Middle Ages, a curious tin plague began as growths on organ pipes in European cathedrals, where it was thought to be the work of the devil trying to disfigure God's work. This tin plague started as white blisters that spread until all the tin metal sickened and disintegrated. The plague spread to tin roofs and became a serious problem during Europe's frigid winters. We now know that the impurities of aluminum and zinc found in tin made in the Middle Ages caused its crystalline structure to change when it was heated or frozen. This caused the tin metal to break down into a white powder that appeared to eat away the metal and had the ability to infect other tin surfaces it came in contact with. Mars metal, iron. Iron is an abundant element in the universe and is even found in the stars in considerable quantity because iron nuclei are very stable. Iron is the most prevalent metal on Earth and the second oldest metal used by man, after lead. Known in prehistoric times, it was smelted by the Egyptians at least as far back as 1500 BCE, and iron artifacts from Asia have been found that are 5,000 years old. Our word iron comes from the Anglo-Saxon word iron, a word derived from an earlier word meaning holy metal, because it was used to make the swords used in the Crusades. The chemical symbol for iron is Fe, from the Latin word for iron, ferrum, which means to create, form, or bear forth. Iron is very reactive and forms compounds immediately, so pure iron does not occur in nature. The purest iron on our planet actually comes from outer space in the form of meteorites, which are usually alloys of nickel and iron. One of the many ores of iron is iron sulfide, also known as pyrite or fool's gold. Its beautiful golden luster has often been mistaken for the gleam of golden nuggets, and it has been frequently found in genuine gold deposits. Like gold, iron pyrite carries the golden signature of the sun, and a flattened round variety called the pyrite sun is prized for its esoteric properties. Remarkably, the iron sulfide structure of fool's gold is exactly the same as the lead ora galena, or lead sulfide. The only difference is that a pair of sulfur atoms in pyrite replace a single sulfur atom in galena. This pair of sulfur atoms disrupts the stubborn fourfold symmetry of the more ancient galena ore and produces a stunning transformation into fool's gold. In esoteric terms, in the evolution of the metals, the appearance of the sulfur compound of iron or fool's gold has freed the lead archetype of its stubborn materiality and set form, and this notable transmutation is marked by the signature of gold. Iron's love for carbon. European alchemists noticed that when they dropped bits of charcoal into molten iron, the iron hungrily devoured the charcoal to produce what we now call cast iron. While pure iron was soft and malleable, the new metal was hard and brittle. By controlling the amount of charcoal introduced, it was possible to produce steel whose characteristics lie between the extremes of pure iron and cast iron. The alchemists deduced that iron had a profound love for carbon, with which it could form the nobler and stronger metal, steel. Our modern attitude toward iron is much less romantic. Nearly all iron produced today is used in the steel industry, which transforms iron into steel in carbon-based forced air blast furnaces. This process is one of the most significant industrial processes in history, and resulted in iron as steel becoming the most common metal on the planet. Iron also has a passion for other metals, each of which adds different qualities to the iron to produce unique forms of steel. The alchemists viewed these other metals as spiritual brothers of iron and named them accordingly. Cobalt was associated with the kobolds, or mischievous gnomes, who lived deep in the earth and were said to harass miners. The alchemists considered cobalt an earthier and more primitive form of iron. Nickel was associated with the nixies, or underwater spirits. The alchemists viewed nickel as the watery brother of iron, which expressed its watery nature in its shiny liquid surface and in the sea-green compounds it produced. Manganese was the fiery brother of iron because it produced fiery red salts. Added to iron, manganese produces extremely hard and dry steel. Shiny chromium was considered iron's sister. Chromium restores the shiny liquid look of pure iron to steel. Later, alchemists found they could produce steel almost as hard as diamonds by adding tungsten and vanadium to iron. Mars signatures in iron. The influences of the planet Mars and its metal iron are obvious. Throughout its history, iron has always served man's will in his weaponry or in the industrial conquest of nature. In classical mythology, the Iron Age is the final epoch of the world, marked by war and degenerate selfishness. The expression of Mars in our world seems to be in the struggle for material possessions in which only the fittest or perhaps richest survive. If the predominance of the iron archetype in our culture continues, we can only expect a further distancing from nature and mechanization of life. Some nature-oriented civilizations, such as the Druids, were aware of the spiritual dangers of iron and actually forbid its use in their culture. Tread carefully. Be careful in working with the signatures of iron on the personal level. While an iron will and aggressive tactics are often required to succeed in our culture, over the long run the energies of iron tend to make you brittle, suspicious, and unforgiving. Martian energies must always be balanced with the compassion and understanding of Venus. In the Hermetic teachings, the incarnating function of iron was meant to assist cosmic or spiritual elements to enter the sphere of gravity and matter. But when iron becomes too predominant, it becomes destructive to life and tends to rigidify and mechanize living systems. The Mars impulses at work in iron, noted researcher Rudolf Hauck, are the carriers of the forces of embodiment. But these forces lead to mummification if they become too active and overwhelm the system. The alchemists were certainly aware of the hidden signatures of iron and the social implications of the Iron Age. Several alchemists warned of the spiritual dangers of iron, even though they recognized it was necessary in the great work, and that the iron phase eventually led to the transformation of the body into the spirit become form. In Alchemy, Titus Burckhardt quoted several alchemists who warned of the dangers of the Iron Age. One described it as an active descent of the spirit into the lowest levels of human consciousness. So at this stage of the work, the spirit appears submerged in the body and as if extinguished in it. Venus's metal, copper. The discovery of copper dates from prehistoric times, and copper beads dating back to 9000 BCE have been found in Iraq. Copper pottery dating from 4900 BCE has been unearthed in Egypt. Copper is found in its metallic state in nature and has been mined for thousands of years. The name and chemical symbol Cu for copper comes from the Latin word cuprum, meaning the island of Cyprus, which was one of the main copper mining areas in the ancient world. Actually, the island took its name from the Assyrian word for copper, kipar. Copper was used so early partly because it was so easy to shape. Methods for refining copper from its ores were discovered around 5000 BCE, and the Phoenicians and Sumerians made all their tools and weapons from copper. Then, around 3100 BCE, Egyptian alchemists discovered that when they mixed copper with other metals, the resulting alloys were harder than copper itself. For example, both brass, a mixture of copper and zinc, and bronze, a mixture of copper and tin, are harder than copper. The discovery of bronze changed the evolution of mankind, and the Bronze Age began around 2100 BCE. Copper is a reddish-brown metal with a bright metallic luster. In the periodic table, it is in the same group as gold, and like gold, it is remarkably ductile and can be pressed into extremely thin sheets and strands. Copper is an excellent conductor of both heat and electricity. Venus signatures in copper. The alchemist described Venus's copper planetary source as dressed in a blue cloak over a red gown. This is a reference to the observation that copper burns with a blue-green flame, with sporadic flashes of red. Molten copper is a sea-green color, and copper tarnishes with a green color. Copper has always been associated with beauty and harmony. Egyptian women used the powdered copper oral malachite to beautify their eyes. Copper pigments make wonderfully colored paints and inks, and much of the color in birds comes from the presence of copper in feathers. Some birds, such as the alchemically symbolic peacock, contain as much as 6% copper in their feathers. The love affairs of copper. Copper combines readily with most other elements to form alloys or complex salts. In fact, copper is so ready to form unions with other substances that the alchemists called the metal Meretrix metallorum, harlot of the metals. Copper shows a special love for sulfur, and geologists agree that copper and sulfur have been locked in an embrace in the bowels of the earth since primordial times. Copper sulfate, known as blue vitriol to the alchemists, is one of the most beautiful and useful compounds formed by copper. It dries into a white powder when exposed to air, but rapidly returns to a beautiful blue crystal when exposed to water. Unlike lead and iron ore, copper ore has a great affinity for water, and copper salts, such as copper sulfate, contain as much as 35% water. Veins of copper run extensively throughout the planet like veins of blood in a human body, and the metal has many applications in the modern world as wiring, electrical components, and tubing. Nearly all coins in the world contain copper. In addition to copper pennies, our dimes and quarters are about 85% copper. Even the nickel is 75% copper. Most modern copper production is from sulfide ores containing little copper but quite a bit of iron, which is another element copper likes to spend time with. The signatures of copper are very important in working with all the metals, especially iron. Copper tends to balance and elevate the energy of metals, and it symbolizes the importance of the feminine influence in the great work. As shown in the following illustration, the work requires a cooperative effort between the male and female energies, not only in the lab but also on the spiritual level shown in the upper half of the drawing. The male and female alchemists in the drawing represent masculine and feminine ways of working with the substance at hand. The union of these two ways of being in the world is absolutely necessary to success in alchemical transformations. Mercury's metal, quicksilver. The silvery liquid metal mercury was known as quicksilver to the alchemists. The only metal that is liquid at room temperature, it is the heaviest natural liquid on the planet. According to alchemical theory, all the metals begin in the liquid state on our planet, but only mercury was able to remain true to its original innocence and resist taking on a final form. Mercury can be found in its natural state pooled in caves and rock formations. It was known to ancient Chinese and Hindus before 2000 BCE and has been found in Egyptian tombs dating from 1500 BCE. Mercury was first used to form alloys with other metals around 500 BCE and became the object of much speculation and experimentation among the Alexandrian alchemists. Mercury the metal is actually named after Mercury the planet. The chemical abbreviation for mercury is Hg, from the Latin word hydra argyrum, meaning watery silver. In the Orient, the cipher for mercury is an 8-spoke wheel. Today, mercury is used in thermometers, barometers, diffusion pumps, and many other laboratory instruments. It is also used for mercury switches and other electrical apparatus for making batteries or mercury cells in batteries and in anti-fouling paint. Cinnabar, mercury sulfide, is the primary ore of mercury. The word cinnabar comes from the Persian word for dragon's blood. The mineral is a beautiful scarlet red, semi-precious, and used as a high-grade paint pigment known as vermilion. Early metal workers and alchemists considered the affinity between mercury and sulfur in cinnabar a fundamental and magical principle. The Romans mined cinnabar for its mercury content, and it has been the main ore of mercury throughout the centuries. Some of those ancient Roman mines are still being mined today. Cinnabar is often found with deposits of quartz, stibnite or antimony, and pyrite or fool's gold. From the Alchemist. In nuclear experiments carried out in the 1990s, a mysterious form of mercury known as red mercury was discovered. Early reports noted it was the densest matter ever found, but suddenly the government clamped a lid of secrecy on the project. It has been noted that the properties of red mercury make it ideal for a suitcase-size, non-radioactive neutron bomb, as well as possible source of nearly endless energy. To add to the intrigue, rumors circulated in the 1980s that natural deposits of red mercury had been discovered in Grenada, Iraq, and Russia. Mercury is a relatively poor conductor of heat and yet is extremely sensitive to it. Mercury expands and contracts in a direct linear relationship to temperature, which is why it is used in thermometers. It is an average conductor of electricity in its liquid state, but becomes one of the best conductors known between copper and gold when frozen. In its chemical reactions, mercury acts as a harmonizer because it serves as a catalyst that combines chemicals with opposing properties and speeds up reactions. The power of mercury to balance diverse substances makes it useful as a mediator in explosive devices, and as a mixture of mercury and nitric acid, or mercury fulminate, makes a reliable detonator for explosives. Mercury is also used in the making of nuclear bombs as a mediator in the detonation process. Mercury signatures in quicksilver. Mercury moistens and dissolves other metals the way water dissolves salt, and for this reason the alchemists believed it was the key to the transformation of the metals. The dissolved alloys of mercury are called amalgams, and the ease and speed with which mercury amalgamates with gold makes it of primary importance in the recovery of gold from its ores. Mercury dissolves gold, silver, copper, tin, lead, zinc, cadmium, and all the alkaline metals, but does not affect iron or any members of the iron family, such as nickel or aluminum. The alchemists thought this antipathy between iron and mercury stemmed from the two metals' diametrically opposed signatures. Iron represents the mechanical processes of structuring and control, while mercury represents the living processes of growth and mobility. Since ancient times, mercury has stood for the life force and the light of awareness in matter. In the writings of alchemists, it is often referred to as Mercurius vivens, or living mercury. Because of its signatures of life and growth, mercury has long been associated with twisted serpents such as in the staff of Hermes, the medical caduceus, oriental fighting dragons, shamanic serpents, and even the structure of DNA. All these symbols allude to the fact that the metal mercury somehow carries the principle of life. Strangely, mercury exhibits a breathing pattern when heated almost to its boiling point. At that point, it starts sucking in oxygen and produces a yellow-red oxide. Upon further heating, the process reverses and the mercury expels the oxygen like a metallic lung. This odd characteristic of mercury led chemist James Priestley to discover the element of oxygen. The dual nature of mercury. Mercury has always had a dual nature and was often referred to as the rebus, or double thing, by alchemists. While mercury is a symbol of the life force, it is also intimately connected with the forces of death and decay. While some mercury compounds are therapeutic, others are extremely poisonous. Mercury metal itself is toxic, and its fumes can be lethal. Organic mercury compounds are especially dangerous because they can be readily absorbed into the human body. Methylmercury is a lethal pollutant from industrial waste found in rivers and lakes, and mining and the use of mercury in commercial products have increased the organic mercury content of our environment to 10 times its natural level. High concentrations have been detected in shellfish and tuna, as well as other aquatic species, and mercury compounds from soil are detectable in nearly every kind of food. Tread carefully. Do not be seduced by the lure of mercury into handling mercury metal. Open containers of mercury emit poisonous yet completely odorless fumes at room temperature. The threat increases significantly under warmer conditions. If mercury is spilled, it breaks up into scores of tiny balls which dramatically increase the surface area and the amount of vapors released. Health authorities consider even small amounts of mercury metal toxic. In the body, mercury follows the blood and nerves and goes right for the brain. In a demonstration of mercury's affinity for gold, one 18th century English alchemist put a gold coin in his mouth and then stuck his big toe into a saucer of mercury. Within 30 minutes, the liquid metal had traveled to his mouth and coated the gold coin in a swath of silvery mercury. Unfortunately, he was able to perform his stunt only a few times before he died of mercury poisoning. Mercury poisoning attacks the consciousness and spirit of a person. Symptoms begin with problems in concentration and attention and progress to anxiety, agitation, excessive emotions, impaired motor function, impaired memory, depression, hallucinations, tremors, slurred speech, and mental retardation. The mental deterioration caused by mercury is known as erethism and was first diagnosed among 19th century hat makers who used a mercury compound to kill bacteria in felt and fur hats. The syndrome became known popularly as Mad Hatter's disease. The moon's metal, silver. Silver has been known since ancient times and is mentioned in Genesis. People knew how to separate silver from lead ore as early as 3000 BCE. It has always been popular in jewelry and for coinage, but in the past 150 years, the demand has skyrocketed due to the photographic and industrial uses. Our word silver comes from the Anglo-Saxon word silfur, which was their name for the metal silver. The origin of the chemical symbol for silver, Ag, comes from the Latin word argentums, meaning silver. Alchemists associated silver with the moon, which they called Luna, and designated the queen of alchemy. They used the name Luna Philosophorum to refer to the planetary spirit of silver. Pure silver has a brilliant white metallic luster associated with the moon. Contrary to popular belief, silver does not tarnish when exposed to pure air or water vapor. It only tarnishes in the presence of sulfur compounds in the air or to ozone. Silver has the highest electrical and heat conductivity of all metals, but also the peculiar property of reflecting electricity and heat without being affected by it. In other words, heat and electricity pass directly through silver without leaving much behind in the metal. Silver is usually found with deposits of lead and copper, and silver forms the most organic or living crystals of all the metals, which is to say that silver crystals tend to grow into structures that resemble living plants and animals, rather than the more mechanical mineral crystals formed by lead and iron. Lunar signatures in silver. Like the moon, silver comes to life in reflected light. Used in the making of mirrors, the lunar metal is the best reflector of visible light known. Silver nitrate, silver bromide, and many other silver salts are photosensitive. In photographic film, the crystals of the silver nitrate actually are rearranged through the action of light. Silver has other lunar signatures. When melted and hardened again, trapped oxygen is expelled in gas eruptions that leave behind a lunar surface pocked with craters. In alchemy, the moon and its metal were always associated with the soul. On the psychological level, the lunar powers represent the subconscious self, of which the conscious self is a reflection. The moon and silver were considered to be analogous to the soul in its state of pure receptivity, summarized Hermeticist Titus Buchart, whereas the soul transmuted and illumined by the spirit was analogous to the sun and the metal gold. The moon's influence over silver. The moon is associated with the tides and water, and its influence over the oceans draws silver to it. Most of the silver metal on our planet is now dissolved in seawater. It has also been shown that the behavior of silver nitrate in filter media varies with the phases of the moon. Researchers have even documented disturbances caused by lunar eclipses. The sun's metal, gold. Gold was known and considered sacred from earliest times, and Egyptian inscriptions dating back to 2600 BCE describe gold. Around the world, nearly every culture associated their supreme god or goddess with gold. For many centuries, only the images of gods graced gold coins, until Alexander the Great began the trend of rulers' images appearing on gold coins in 330 BCE. The chemical symbol for gold, Au, comes from the Latin word aurum, meaning gold. The alchemical cipher for gold is a rendition of the sun, and gold was considered a kind of congealed solar light. Sol is the king of alchemy, and his royal purple color is the indicator of gold particles in solution. Pure gold metal found in nature seems to like the company of the purest white quartz, and is also found mixed with deposits of pyrite or fool's gold and a few other sulfur minerals. Gold rarely unites with any other substance, although it does form compounds with tellurium sulfides and a few other sulfur compounds. From The Alchemist. 1 ounce of gold can be stretched into a single wire 35 miles long, or beaten to just a few atoms thick. Still highly valued, gold is used as coinage and is a standard for monetary systems in many countries. Gold is extremely ductile and malleable and relatively easy for artisans to work with, so it is used in making jewelry and artwork, and also in dentistry, electronics, and plating. Because it is an excellent reflector of infrared energy, such as what emerges from the sun, gold is used to coat Earth satellites, interstellar probes, and windows of modern skyscrapers. Solar signatures in gold. Gold is an aloof and stubbornly pure metal when it comes to reacting or even associating with lesser elements. That signature explains many of the chemical characteristics of gold. Unlike other metals, no plants contain even trace amounts of metallic gold, and there are very few gold ores because the noblest metal never alloys with baser metals. It's only alloys with silver, although it makes an amalgam with mercury. Gold embodies an inner equilibrium of forces that make it pretty much indestructible. Gold never tarnishes, and whether found buried in the ground, at the bottom of the ocean, in an ancient tomb, or in the ring on your finger, it always looks the same. It is the most flexible, enduring, and beautiful of all metals. The immortal metal is endlessly recycled, and all the gold known today is very nearly equal to all the gold that has ever been mined. Sol Philosophorum was the name the alchemists gave to the archetypal principle of the sun, the refined essence of heat and fire expressed in the metal gold. According to the medieval alchemists, nature continually seeks to recreate the perfection it achieved in making gold, and every material yearns to become gold. Gold is at the head of the metals, and alchemists paired it with what in their mind was the strongest and purest planet, the sun. The sun's influence over gold. Chemist Lily Kolisko performed experiments with gold chloride and showed its chemical behavior coincided with events that altered the strength of the sun, such as the weakening in solar forces during solar eclipses or their increase during summer solstice. Moreover, she found that both silver compounds and gold compounds seemed to be equally influenced by the sun. In the case of silver, the structure or patterns changed, whereas with gold, the colors changed. Silver shapes moved from jagged spikes to smooth rolling forms, but the colors remained hues of gray, while the basic shape of gold patterns remained the same, but the colors changed from brilliant yellows to violet and reddish-purple hues. This work, which others have duplicated, presents an amazing confirmation of how the king and queen of alchemy, the archetypal Sol and Luna, work together. The female lunar principle represents soul and form. The male solar principle represents spirit, energy, and light. The least you need to know. The powers of each of the 7 planets are represented on Earth in the 7 metals of the alchemists. Lead contains the fire of its own transformation. Tin carries the complementary cosmic powers to balance lead. Iron and copper are the king and queen of the metals. Mercury, with the power to dissolve and balance all the other metals, was considered the principle of transformation in the metals. Silver and gold are the universal archetypes of soul and spirit, which were known as Luna and Sol to the alchemists. All right, that concludes part 4. I will be back next week to continue with part 5, Spiritual Alchemy. Thank you so much.